Welcome all. Welcome to all the people online. We have quite a lot of people online, so it's nice to see you there. And welcome people in the room. Thank you very much for coming. And despite the weather, it takes some grit to survive the English weather in these weeks. So horrible. And especially thank you, Roberto, for making all the way from Italy. I know you were in London and I snatched you from London very quickly for making all the way from London down here. As I do always with these presentations, I spend 1 minute to explain what the Palestinian interdisciplinary dialogues are. And I also start with a moment of silence because speaking about the Palestinian peoples right now is an incredibly painful, thing, an incredibly painful moment. We have students from Gaza here in Sussex. Today I was speaking to one of the students. Yesterday I was giving a talk in London with another one of the students. And inevitably, when you speak to them, you are confronted directly about the fact that one of the brothers was killed a few months ago. Their house was bombed in August. And the amount of the tragedy is so insurmountable that they need to keep, I was discussing today with the student, they need to keep distance from it if they want to continue life as normal. Because if they stopped to think about what happened, life will finish. And so in the spirit of the Palestinians, which is the spirit of Sumud, this philosophy of steadfastness, we carry on with these dialogues and with this Palestinian interdisciplinary network, because it's a way of existing and a way of, affirming our existence, which is very important at this moment of erasure. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the people online. My name is Zahira Jaser. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Sussex. I work in the business school. My research used to rotate around, voice in organizations and managerial relationships. But of course, since the genocide started, it has shifted to really starting to study voice and silence for the Palestinians and the silencing of the Palestinians. And that's why it's so important to have Roberto today here. I'm going to give an introduction to him. I'm going to speak a little bit about the book, super quickly, and then we dive into, because this is exactly what Roberto explores, is, how does it happen that Palestinians are silenced and ignored to such an extent? Mm-hmm. So Dr. Roberto De Vogli is an associate professor in global health and psychology of power at the University of Padua, and a visiting professor at the School of Advanced Studies at the University of London. He has published extensively in leading peer-reviewed journals, including Nature, The Lancet, the British Medical Journal, and is the author of 2 previous books. In 2025, he will publish 2 new books. He has published already the book Selective Empathy, The West Through the Gaze of Gaza, which is the book that we are listening to today. And also he has another book with Edward Elgar, Well-being and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He brings our attention to the fact that empathy is not a universal concept, but a selective faculty shaped by invisible structures of powers and perception. And he starts with a really quite interesting, disarming, simple question. Why is our moral attention so unevenly distributed? Why do certain human tragedies, like the death of children in Ukraine, galvanize international outrage and solidarity, while others of comparable scale or even bigger, like the killing of children in Gaza, are met with relative indifference or paralysis? So welcome to Dr. Roberto De Vogli. Nice to have you today with us. Thank you so much.
They told me I need to move in this area.
Yeah, around here.
First of all, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Zahira, for inviting me and for organizing this event. Can I do this for
Yes, you can.
slides? For moving the slides. Or I can just...
Yeah, if you click the button.
Yeah. So I will try not to bore you too much, but I have a few things to explain. But you can stop me if you want.
Can the people online hear? Sorry, just testing that before we. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
So, as described in the cover of the book, the genocide in Gaza has revealed a moral blind spot in the West eye. A crisis that showed a civilization that reserves compassion for some while ignoring others. Another premise, this is a book that has been rejected, ignored, or censored by almost 100 publishers, Italian and British or American publishers. So I have this special achievement already to show off to the public. And since we introduced this topic, I want to show you and share a personal anecdote that actually proves what I'm saying. June 3rd, 2024, imagine receiving this message from the publisher with whom you have already signed a contract to write a book about Gaza. Dear Roberto, we are delighted that you have accepted our contract proposal for your book, Selective Empathy. However, we anticipate a problem with the word genocide. Because it's a legal term, with a strict legal definition, the use of this term carries a legal burden, has legal consequences for both you and us as publishers. To avoid this dangerous territory, we would like to ask you to replace the term genocide with another word like mass atrocities. Is that okay? Cheers. Of course, it was not okay, but it meant that I no longer had a publisher, right? Fortunately, a few months later, at a conference in Istanbul, I read the same letter I've read to you, and to a large audience of researchers, academics, and activists. And when the session ended, a tall man wearing red glasses approached me. He was my future editor. After briefly introducing himself, he smiled and said, "We are going to publish your book with the word genocide." And that's where we are, thanks to Rio de Groot and this publisher. Is genocide indeed a term to avoid, as my previous publisher suggested? And why did I decide not to give up the term? Why? First, because as a quantitative social epidemiologist, I rely on data, and data speak for themselves. Gaza exhibits indicators of death and destruction that are not comparable to any other recent war zones. In just 1 year of relentless assault and blockade, the average life expectancy in Gaza has collapsed by around 35 years. This represents a decline of longevity that is more severe than the drop of life expectancy experienced in Rwanda in 1994, when life expectancy collapsed by 30 years. Some have raised doubts about these estimates. However, epidemiologists are famous for not agreeing with one another, like economists, more or less. But surprisingly, a new paper that was published a month ago confirmed this estimate, showing that life expectancy losses were between 34 and 36 years. Also, Gaza has suffered the highest number of attacks on hospitals, healthcare facilities, and schools in recent war operations. The highest number of doctors killed and healthcare workers killed in war zones. The highest number of UN personnel and humanitarian workers killed since the beginning of the UN history. Also, Gaza is home of the largest cemetery of journalists. To place things into perspective, this group from Brown University showed that they killed more journalists in Gaza than in World War I, World War II, the US Civil War, the wars in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, the Korean War, Yugoslav wars, the war in Afghanistan, Ukraine war, all together. Okay, just to show you some numbers, in almost 3 years of brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, they killed approximately 21 journalists. In Gaza, we are talking about 233 in October 2025. Also, Gaza has experienced the worst child mortality crisis in war zones. As this paper in the British Medical Journal says, while civilian casualties have been significant in all other cases studied in this paper, no one has seen the number of civilian deaths, particularly among children, as in Gaza since the last October. Thinking about this children death, we are talking about more than 20,000 children who have died in Gaza. And I remember when some friends suggested me to drop the word genocide and publish the book, which was a kind of interesting suggestion to say, you're going to delay the publication of a book of 1 year. You are sending some important messages to the world. So I understood his point. And my point was another one. It was not just the evidence. I thought that denying the term genocide to 20,000 children who died during a genocide is like killing them twice. Also, Gaza has, according to UNICEF, although this has been a contested statistics, has the largest number of child amputees in the world. There is another reason why I was stubborn and I didn't drop the term genocide. I check all the literature on genocide research. I don't know if you're familiar with, but there is an International Society of Genocide Scholars, there is a Journal of Genocide Research, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Lemkin Institute, even B'Tselem, the most important human rights organizations in Israel, they all agree it's genocide. B'Tselem published a report titled Our Genocide. And these are the mainstream media who obviously show a different picture. So when we published this short article in The Lancet during last summer, and we titled Break the Selective Silence on the Genocide in Gaza with Jonathan Montemoli, Ghassan Roussita, and Ilan Papet. We talk about a petition and an open letter that was signed by 15,000 people, including professors, physicians, and professionals. And the letter basically asked academic associations to recognize the genocide in Gaza, to recognize the consensus that was coming from all these human rights and UN-based organizations. And indeed, the letter and the petition was approved, and like, for example, organizations that count more than 10 million members have recognized the genocide. And during those months, my university did a press release and we got some media attention. And a local radio presenter told me, "Good job, professor, but why so late? It's July 2025. And the genocide went on for a while. He was not aware that on October 20th, 2023, I wrote in my blog in an Italian newspaper, Il Fatto Quotidiano, can we accuse Israel of genocide? Can you imagine the number of insults, attacks, and outrage that produced this article? It was too much and too soon, right? But as the situation in Gaza worsened, basically more experts and realized the severity of what was unfolding. Yet a question remains, why has the West justified, minimized, or remain indifferent to what can be considered the most filmed, videotape genocide in human history, right? As Gabor Mate, Canadian psychiatrist who lost part of his family in Auschwitz, put it, the genocide in Gaza is like watching Auschwitz on TikTok. Here, Richard Horton, editor of The Lancet, tried to reframe the same question. Why is this mass slaughter permitted by the international community? And he argued that maybe our compassion toward each other has been eroded. But there is no evidence that in the West there has been a decline of compassion. Moreover, the international community has shown it can respond decisively and swiftly to other humanitarian crises, mobilizing support, aid, and resources when it decides to. The problem then might not be a decline of compassion, but a selective manifestation of it. And that's where my journey on selective empathy starts. And what is selective empathy? Is the tendency to feel compassion primarily or exclusively for members of one's in-group, based on what? Race, nationality, religion, social status, while showing little or no empathy whatsoever for the members of the out-group. It's a psychological trait characterized by bias, prejudice, an us versus them mentality, and a strong sense of cultural and national superiority. Here, one of the ministers in Italy here said that the war in Ukraine is much more crueler than the one in Gaza. That's why Italy shows so much support for Ukraine. I'm talking about military support. However, the data show a very different picture, show that the child mortality that we witness in Gaza is far higher than in Ukraine. This doesn't want to diminish the suffering of Ukraine. Don't get me wrong. I feel all my pain for the death of civilians over there. But these numbers basically ask loudly why some countries are being helped with aid and all sorts of military support, and while another country has not been aid at all. Let's remember that the West, in the case of Ukraine, sent weapons to a country that has been attacked by a brutal foreign nation, right? Russia. In the case of Gaza, the West has sent weapons to the aggressor. Also, the civilian to casualty ratios, which establish how many civilians are killed compared to combatants, show that in Gaza is over 80%. In Ukraine is much lower, although in Mariupol is far higher. But when taking all country together, is far lower. And this disparity in sanction is really mind-blowing. Over 16,000 sanctions for Russia. How many sanctions for Israel? Virtually none. Some people ask, why some of us focus so much on Gaza when there are other humanitarian crises in the world? There are many other wars in the world. They miss the point, not only because of the statistics I mentioned, but also because of this inequality in aid and military support. Mass media, and I devoted 2 chapters in my book, have played an important role in fostering this sense of collective, selective empathy and selective moral indignation. I have identified at least 4 types of mechanisms of what I call selective moral disengagement, inspired by Albert Bandura, one of the most world-renowned psychologists ever lived and instrumental in fostering knowledge and galvanizing understanding around this topic. There are at least 4: denial, minimization of suffering, justification of mass atrocities, and victim blaming. An example of denial: a leaked internal memo by the New York Times instructed editors not to use the term genocide and ethnic cleansing. Here, The Economist, 6 days before the International Criminal Court basically deemed the South African action that basically asked the court to recognize that Israel was violating the Genocide Convention. And the ICJ recognized that Israel is basically perpetrating plausible acts of genocide and even intimated Israel to stop its genocidal activities. Well, The Economist wrote, charging Israel with genocide makes a mocker of the ICJ. More than 24,000 people were already killed at the time. More than 61,000 have been injured. More than 60% of homes destroyed. And more than 2 million people were risking famine. Minimizing suffering. Here, Fox News. Israel releases new Gaza civilian death toll, says Hamas numbers are fake and fabricated. The Ministry of Health of Palestine cannot be relied upon, and so data are fake and fabricated. Here they blame the UN, controlled by Hamas is producing wrong numbers, but finally they made, they show that their numbers were biased. Of course, when you look at serious public health journals and articles, you find a completely different picture. Most mainstream media seem to pinpoint here that the casualties are being overestimated, right? When public health scholars publish studies on Gaza in the Lancet, British Medical Journal, they show that actually it's exactly the opposite. And this study by a colleague show an upper bound of even 600,000 deaths. I don't know if these numbers are reliable, I have to say. I can only say that nobody knows how many people have died in Gaza, not only because so many are under the rubble, 50 million tons of rubble. It will take 20 years to clean them up, but also because of the indirect effects of the genocide on malnutrition, healthcare access, the destruction of healthcare facilities, the lack of access to water and sanitation. That basically epidemiologists say that for every person who is killed during a conflict, at least between 3 and 15 die of other indirect causes. Justification of mass atrocities. Here the New York Times, fatal strike in dense area as Israelis aim at Hamas. Hind Rajab, 6, found dead in Gaza days after phone calls for help. I don't know if you know the story of Hind Rajab. She was killed in her car with 335 bullets. And I recommend to watch The Voice of Hind Rajab.
Who's watched the movie?
Yeah, to
You can't watch it. Lots of people can watch it because
Yeah.
they get traumatized.
I watched it at the Biennale in
And watched
Venice.
it, yeah, when they had a 23 minutes
24 minutes of applause.
standing
It was
ovation.
the longest standing ovation in the history of Venice movie festival. But it was devastating, I have to say. I'm not sure even whether to recommend to see the movie.
I watched it twice because I'm writing about it, but
Yeah.
it's very sad.
Yeah.
But it's
So basically, her car was hit with 335 bullets, and the Red Crescent ambulance sent to save her after they approved the trajectory.
Yes.
It was bombed, and the rescuers were killed. Okay, but according to Michael Gove, a prominent British politician, the IDF should deserve Nobel Peace Prize. This is the Financial Times. Even though there is plenty of evidence that what is considered the most moral army in the world is basically targeting civilians and children in a deliberate and systematic way. How do we know? From the doctors. From the doctors that report a relentless stream of children arriving with single bullet wounds to the head, to the chest, and some, they say, to the testicles. Victim blaming is the last part, and here I show another personal anecdote. So, do you remember the first Lancet article I showed you a few minutes ago? Break the selective silence on the genocide in Gaza. We received the attention of some colleagues who criticized us for saying that we lack rigor. And also, in their analysis, and I mean, you're welcome to read it. I can send you the links. Basically, they say that they claim that Hamas uses health infrastructures to store weapons and operate command posts. Also, they say some health workers and journalists, we mentioned the relentless attacks on healthcare workers in our previous Lancet paper. They say, yes, but these health workers and journalists killed in the conflict have also been linked to Hamas operatives, raising legitimate concerns about the misuse of civilian professions. It's unfortunate that they first showed no evidence whatsoever. When we challenged them, they provided this reference, which is UN Security Council published in 2015. So that has no relation with the genocide that started in 2023, although there was some ethnic cleansing before. And also, I was really shocked when I was reading. I haven't found a single time when they used the word hospital. It was about schools. It was not about hospital. And the climax was that at one point in the report, they say in the 3 schools we check for weaponry, we found they were empty at the time and not being used as shelters. Another reference they use to blame healthcare workers and journalists for being tied with Hamas. I expected they provided some forensic evidence of those who were killed tied with Hamas. I don't know. Show me some solid data. No, they quote a paper that talks about another subject, which is, according to their perspective, the bias of the New York Times. So they don't provide any evidence on their claims, and they were published in the Lancet. So we were not nice in our response. The first phrase of the article is like almost thanking them for being like a perfect case of genocide denial and selective moral disengagement. Actually, the topic I was trying to explain. And we say that claiming without citing any solid source that health workers and journalists under attack in Gaza are linked to Hamas are forms of victim blaming. So Gaza has become a moral litmus test for the West, for the academic association scientists. And the last sentence of our Lancet paper is a test that some have miserably failed, but not all of us have failed. Gaza also revealed another side of the West, is collective conscience. While most Western politicians, mainstream media, spokespeople, and influential intellectuals have remained indifferent or justified the genocide, others have stood up for it. They have been outraged by horrors suffered by Gaza and have responded with protests, mass mobilizations, like in the case of Flotilla. Think about the volunteer doctors who risk their lives in what remains of Gaza's last hospitals. Think about the conscientious objectors who refused to join the Israeli army and went to jail. Think about the students who have set up encampment for Palestine. These are my students at the University of Padua, Palazzo Bo. Or the academics like Fiona Godley. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, is that okay? I'm praying here because it's time to pray.
Sure.
Thank you.
No. This is Fiona Godley, former director of the British Medical Journal, arrested her crime protesting the genocide. So these acts of dissent that have thrown sands into the gears of genocide have shown that there is another West that cares about equity, solidarity, and justice, and also show that selective empathy is not inevitable. Trying to look at time. Because selective empathy is certainly part of our DNA, but also is not only shaped by biology, but also shaped by ideology as well. So selective empathy lies in our mental constructions, collective imaginations, and manufactured, fabricated social norms. These can be challenged and changed, so they, in turn, can challenge and change how we think and how we feel. So to empathize and feel the world's pain across all national boundaries, from Gaza to Ukraine, from Sudan to North Korea, right? Sounds like utopian, right? But we can universalize our empathy by recognizing that every life is equally worthy of grief and dignity. Let's take an example. When considering the most innocent victims of what happened since October 7, some Western politicians have called for a few minutes of silence in memory of the Israeli children who died on October 7. And some protesters, however, have rebuffed this cause by highlighting the far greater plight of Palestinian boys and girls who died in Gaza since October 7. But we need to move away from this position. It is dutiful, deeply human to observe 35 minutes of silence for the 33 Israeli children, innocent children, killed by Hamas on October 7, and the 2 Israeli children kidnapped and killed as hostages by Hamas. And it's also deeply respectful and important to devote 13 days of silence for the 20,000 Palestinian children killed in Gaza. So it's possible to imagine humanity as a single entity after all. And there is even a measure in psychology who can quantify how much we feel, how much our identity is humanity as a whole, not just our community. So it is possible for the West to cry the same tears for Hind Rajab as it did for Anne Frank. And identify with all humanity is associated with very open-mindedness, an inclusive approach to social relationships, charitable behavior, and human rights activism. These are all research studies who have proved the connections between identification with all humanity and all these qualities. When we recognize ourselves in the whole of humanity, there are no other countries because the only country is the world. And there are no more foreigners because the whole of humanity becomes our nation. In an era marked by the threat of nuclear war, national populism, us versus them mentality, an identity that transcends flags and tribal sentiments, offers a glimpse of moral inspiration beyond borders and the possibility of collective psychopolitical change. Like Isaac Asimov said, I don't believe in nations. There are no nations. There is only humanity. And if we don't understand that quickly, there will be no nations because there will be no humanity. Some think that what happens in Gaza is very distant from our lives. It doesn't matter, some say. But I think they are mistaken. And what is happening in Gaza is going to have reverberations for the entire world. If a genocide is perpetrated with so much impunity, and the international law is trampled so badly as it happens today, then Gaza will not be a distant place for the West. Gaza will be us. And in a sense, it already has. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto.
I'm on time.
You're on time.
I was just trying to.
Yes, you've done an excellent job. So the way it works in academic tradition is that the discussant will read something about the book and they comment, and then we will open to a Q&A. So I've written a little discussion. So Roberto De Vogli's beautifully argued analysis of what humans apply empathy unevenly, on why humans apply empathy unevenly, converges powerfully with my own exploration of these questions. Though I reached similar conclusions by pursuing the analytical path of settler colonialism and racialization, which I know you touched in your chapter 4, but I emphasize that a lot. So Roberto touches upon, so De Vogli departs from Kantian moral philosophy, which grounds human rights in universal principles aimed at perpetual peace. And he concludes there by speaking, we are all the same, right? If we only start to consider we are all the same, then we will have only one humanity. This is on moral imperative of equalities. He examined how structures of power systematically withhold such rights from what I call racialized groups. So I use analytical lenses of racialization to come to the same conclusions that Roberto does. His work shows how empathy is theorized and socially constructed by the media and algorithmic bias. My analysis shows how empathy is politically rationed for geopolitical gains through a hierarchization of humans. This convergence not only validates his central thesis, but also deepens our understanding of the mechanisms that render some lives grievable and some lives expendable. Dr. De Vogli's exploration of this empathy gap leads him to examine the sociopolitical and media narratives that mediate our connection to distant suffering. The most striking revelation for me as a social psychologist who studied racialization is how his conclusion mirror my own despite our slightly different theoretical points. When he traces the contours of selective empathy through public discourses and political rhetoric, I approach the issue through the structural lens of racialization as a settler colonial logic, specifically the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians is not merely a byproduct of conflict, but a necessary precondition of the Israel Zionist settler colonial project. Settler colonialism as a structure is fundamentally premised on the elimination of the native, where through physical displacement, cultural assimilation, think about the schools for the indigenous children in Canada, or political erasure, the native is disposed of, is cancelled. To enact this elimination, the colonizer must first construct a narrative that strips the indigenous population of its full humanity. This dehumanization serves a dual purpose. Psychologically, it creates the colonizer mindset, a cognitive framework that justifies domination by casting the other as inferior, threatening, or undeserving. Think about the framing of Palestinians as terrorists, all of them, or anti-Semite, all of them. Materially, it facilitates the central economic aim for settler colonialism, the accumulation of land and resources that belong to another people. The demonization of the Palestinian people is therefore not an irrational hatred of us versus them, but a rationalized instrumental process. It is the ideological scaffolding required to build and maintain a colonial state. This dynamic is tragically familiar, not as an aberration of the modern West. Oh my gosh, look, we are selective in our headlines. I'm not saying you're saying that, Roberto, right? Because you have an entire chapter of settler colonialism. I want to say this again. But I want to emphasize this point. Our society are built upon models we often take for granted. The United States, Australia, and Canada are built on expropriated indigenous land. The nations of South America through conquest and colonization. Britain and Europe benefited from the greatest dehumanization of them all, which was the slavery trade. The biggest dehumanization in the history of humanity, where people became objects that could be bought and sold. The techniques of bureaucratic genocide witnessed in the Holocaust in 1940s Europe were first honed in Germany's colonial massacre of the Herero and the Nama people in Namibia in the early 20th century. The continuum is clear. What we are witnessing in Israel today is settler colonialism. We are witnessing what happened to the natives of the US, what are called the Red Indian, or to the Aboriginal people of Australia. We are witnessing that in front of our eyes. Today, the Israeli system is building new structures to hang people, Palestinians. This is a new development which was recently approved by the Knesset. If you watch any colonial film, you read any colonial things, hanging in public the natives is a classic colonial trope to humiliate them and to discourage the public. Selective empathy is the emotional corollary to this political and economic logic. It is the mechanism by which society learns to grieve for some victims while overlooking others whose suffering is entangled with its own complicity or historical identity. And let's remember that the West is all colonial. Even Italy, in its own ridiculous way, colonized and destroyed, many people, especially in Ethiopia. Settler colonialism needs racialization as it needs to place the humans in a hierarchy in order to eliminate them. In this context, that makes selective empathy so compelling and its conclusion so robust. Dr. De Vogli's work shows that the pattern of differential grieving is both observable and analyzable through the empirical study of media, policy, and public sentiment as a corollary to the colonial history. The empathy gap is not a random failure of heart, but a systemic outcome, a symptom of deeper historical and political pedagogies. Selective empathy, to dismantle it, we must confront not only our immediate biases, but also and especially the enduring legacies of colonial logic that continue to shape whose pain is visible and whose is rendered invisible. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. So, any questions to Roberto's or to me?
Can I sit down?
Yes. Do you want to put 2 chairs here? Yes.
Sorry. Because I have notes. I was just following your settler colonialism analysis, but let's have a discussion with them.
Yeah.
We can talk
Yeah.
over.
No, absolutely.
I'm just thinking, I know this is not really your field because you're looking into the selective empathy and the causes, but I'm just thinking that we were all sort of chilling in South Africa and thought out, calling it a genocide and the ICJ. But from there, we've gone nowhere. Like, where do we go now?
Yeah.
Firstly, I want to thank you for your book, and I will find and read later.
Yes, I just make a so my book will be released on paperback soon. So because now
It's very expensive right now.
Oh, okay.
Don't buy it now.
in case
Although we're trying to get it in the library.
Yeah,
it will be published on paperback soon.
okay.
And it will be much more affordable. Wait.
I just want to thank you for your efforts because I'm from Turkey, and in Turkey it's so easy to raise your voice for Gaza because it's a Muslim country. But in Western countries, I think it's so hard because of the politics. And I want to say something about the term of genocide. Its legality of it. You said that it was rejected because of this term. Your book was rejected for this term. But when we look at we have an Armenian issue, Armenian laws in our history, which is, or I'm very sorry, but genocide term was created after the World War II, but this issue was in the First World War. But for example, in France, I'm sure I know it, it's illegal to deny Armenian genocide, and they totally agree on it is a genocide, Armenian genocide. But when we look at the Gaza issue, it's totally different. We have a court decision about this, and also it is in 2024, but still it's different. So what do you think about this hypocrisy? I think, in my opinion, in Western countries, this term can be a political gun. For example, France, when in France, sometimes they have good relation with Turkey, but sometimes they have bad relations. When they have bad relations with Turkey, they started to raise this term again in some meetings on parliaments or something like that. So what do you think about this side of person?
I think we got enough
Two good questions.
topics. So thank you for both questions. So the first question is, where do we go now, right? After the South Africa, basically already in January 2020,
They're now saying that the decision is going to be in 2027.
yeah, so I understand, and the two questions are related in a sense, because although we have a process that the ICJ should basically perform, and it will take years, I don't think, as a scholar, as an epidemiologist, and also as a social scientist, we should stick to wait that time before saying it's genocide. If the data from the ground are so revealing, we should use the term and act. And the fact that the international genocide scholars has shown complete support for the verdict. 88% of genocide scholars said it's genocide. I was in London at the Martin Shaw, one of the most prominent genocide scholars. It's genocide. And also emphasizing that the term that you rightly pointed out was developed after World War II by Lemkin, right? If you look at the activities of the Lemkin Institute and how the genocide frame was developed, it's in a preventative approach. It's not about waiting the ICJ before doing something. Also, the ICJ intimated Israel to stop the activities. There is already an order. The problem is, back to your question, the international law has been trampled, has been completely ignored. And also there have been threats to the International Court of Justice by both the US and Israel. So when we have an international order that becomes so biased on the interest of the most powerful countries, who seem to be completely neglectful of all others, we are really in deep trouble. But what we are left with? We are left with this, what we do now, talking about this, protesting about this, try to raise our voices, try to create communities of action, try to inform people, because I can guarantee you that so many friends don't have any understanding of this. And I even have to look at myself. I had to go through a process of decolonization myself because I didn't know. I didn't know about this. It was only through careful study, reading, and deep search that I became aware of what was going on in Palestine. And it took years. It took years. So, although I share a sense of impotence somehow, because the international law has been so neglected anymore. At the same time, these social movements, this collective conscience that the West has shown is also promising. And although in some Muslim countries there has been a responsibility, I mean, we also saw massive protests there. And I hope that in the future that there will be a recognition of what's going on. And I think in the battle of ideas, I think if you will look at indicators like the Nations Brand Index, I think you can see that Israel got hit. And also the boycotting is working.
Yeah. Can I say something? So first of all, this is the classic question I find myself in front every time I speak about this. There is always someone in the audience that manifests hopelessness and inability to see a way forward. And what I tell them is much more fundamental than what Roberto just told them. I told them the Palestinians have been in this situation for 80 years. They have developed internal philosophy and psychological mechanisms to withstand this level of hopelessness, because life must go on and it must go on the land. And so we are in the West spoiled with this idea that we have agency and our action will always bring us to a result. But I can tell you that we need to shift the way we think about this. Sometimes our actions will not bring us to an immediate result. And sometimes we have to do things because they are the right thing to do. And the right thing to do is equality of human rights. And the right thing to do is to continue to stick to these values. We have to make value-based choices, choices of solidarity, choices of community. And if we all do that, we are going to change the world. And this is really one of those moments in history, because there is so much that is absolutely awful. And we are all collectively tested. And what this is actually asking us to do is to shift out from neoliberal mechanisms, individualistic mechanisms, where we think that we are, as an individual, we have an agency, we can achieve something. And every single one of our action will lead us to a gain. We really need to shift to a much more community base and solidarity point of view. There are some businesses now that are, trying to, hire. There are a lot of businesses that are not hiring people that support Palestine. I think maybe my career sometimes is jeopardized because I am so active on Palestine. But I know there are also other businesses that are starting to hire people that are Palestinian. So I can see a shift, and we need to continue going. We cannot doubt of ourselves.
It's a little bit of more observation of the question. So thank you so much for your book, for your work. It's very important. I'm Mirala Bartos. I'm a colleague with Zahira in the management department. So I was thinking that we talk about Gaza, but we should talk also about the West Bank.
Yes.
Okay, so because what you said there does not apply only to Gaza, but Palestine, no? And so if you think there's some symbolic recognition of Palestine as a state, okay, but we think that it's a good thing, but what is really triggering in politics internationally? Because for, how all the situation looks like is a pressure for, defining a new international order, geopolitical order, with so many claims that are so heavy, and this has been, as you said, for 80 years. So was not born yesterday. So you may know Zahira, I'm sure Roberto knows there. It's a very good Italian journalist, Francesca Manocchi, who publishes. So she has lots of video recordings without comments, very little comments, and many of them, most of them are in the West Bank. And what's going on there, it's even less known than Gaza.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I think we have to keep these things together. I think this is my feeling, because that is keeping, how you say, our the real solidarity is from this population to have a country, to have the right to live in a land on their own, and that's a big political issue that we did not resolve after the Second World War. Now it's more a comment. Sorry, it's not really. I'm aware I'm bringing something outside your work, but I feel that there is a connection
it's the same
here.
work.
It's the
work.
same outside the book. Sorry, not your work.
Why you give me an opportunity to say, not for the book purposes. The book is not important. The topic is important. I talk about West Bank in my book, less, of course, but I touch upon it in at least two ways. One, I write about the West Bank to show the West Bank is a litmus test of another kind. It's a litmus test that Israel is not really attacking Hamas. It's attacking the entire Palestinian population. Why? Because as a quantitative social scientist, when you have an equation, right, with an independent variable, and you remove one of the variables, Hamas, and you still have ethnic cleansing, then it means that is really the smoking gun, right? That should be like a no-brainer for anyone looking at the subject. But still, our intellectuals are able to ignore that. I also mentioned all the attacks and all the increases of settlements. We actually rejected a paper in a journal editor because the author wrote that settlements have not been rising, but they are still there. Have been rising like hell.
Yeah.
You don't know during Oslo.
You don't know even the statistics, right? They have been rising, and the attacks after October 7 are relentless. So I thank you for this. I also wanted to touch on something I didn't mention when you said the Holocaust and the genocide in Gaza, right? They create different type of reactions. One of the most mind-blowing facts that the West seems not to ignore, but to at least minimize, is that so many times the Holocaust is used as a weapon to justify or excuse what Israel is, forgetting that the Holocaust is a European genocide.
Yeah.
And the Holocaust is one of the European genocides that I mentioned on briefly for purposes of space, in what I call the European legacies of genocide.
Yeah.
So what you mentioned before, right? So I touch upon Belgium in Congo, France in Algeria, Italy in Ethiopia. If you ask 100 Italians in Rome, Bologna, or Padua, hey, you know what are the most important Italian crimes against humanity we committed in history? Nobody knows. Italiani, brava gente, Italians are good people, right? They don't know we created concentration camps in Libya, concentration camps in former Yugoslavia. We bombed and gassed people in Ethiopia. We bombed the Red Cross because the Red Cross reported us to the International Geneva Convention, I think, or law, while we were doing all these crimes. So there is a process of decolonization that must do. And it should involve not only our memory and facts and history, but also our emotions. That's what I try to say in this book.
And thank you so much, Roberto. And I think this is very important. That's why it's very important to speak about settled colonialism and racialization, because that touches upon the Palestinians, whether they are in the West Bank or in Gaza. And also remember that the fact that Hamas has been removed from the West Bank, it's a result of the Oslo Accords, which was an accord, which was a Trojan horse to get more settlements effectively. But, you know, it was an accord by which there was a swap between demilitarization for land for peace. So you demilitarize Palestinians and we give you your land back, which was clearly a Trojan horse, like an excuse. It was never meant to happen. It was just a way of demilitarizing part of the Palestinians, whilst at the same time militarizing Hamas in Gaza. And there is connection between the fact that Hamas, as many other extreme, Islamists, Hamas is the resistance of the Palestinians, and which is actually resistance, military resistance, is granted under international laws in case of occupation. Hamas is otherwise, however, being called a terrorist organization in many Western countries. And, the militarization of Hamas is something which is, part of the resistance, but also it has been definitely facilitated by funds from Netanyahu. And by doing this, Israel has achieved two objectives at the same time. One, it has kept the Palestinians militarized and therefore reprehensible from the international stage, and on the other, demilitarized and therefore fragile internally and demobilized internally. So it is a strategy of settler colonialism to demobilize them whilst also keeping them mobilized in a very controlled area, so then we can intervene and destroy them. And this is exactly what's happened. That's why we need to think behind this. What's the root cause of what's happening? What's going on geopolitically here?
It's also important to remember and to look at historical passages that inform us of how things evolve. Just two examples. Nelson Mandela and the Mahatma Gandhi are considered almost saints, right? They were both at the time. They were both considered terrorists. Maggie Thatcher called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. So it's really important to deconstruct all this information, because power tends to perform this type of influence on narratives. And all universities, schools, socialization institutions, they tend to portray a very biased view of history. And we should try to do something in this. And not only for Gaza, because it is so vivid and so.
For Greenland too, right?
Yeah.
Greenland is also natives, indigenous people.
Yeah.
That's why it's a claimable land. The logics of colonialism live on.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to absolutely eradicate.
Yeah, when the principles of self-determination, for example, of people, become applied in such a double standard. And remember Slovenia, right? In former Yugoslavia, ex-Yugoslavia, they decided they were a nation. They were tied with the Serbs and with the big Yugoslavia after Tito died. And they decided to be a free country and say, we are Slovenia. You raise a flag. Germany recognized Slovenia in 2 weeks. So it's important that
2 weeks in Serbia. 2 weeks in Serbia.
so, I mean, what I'm saying is that if we really apply international law, we really need to stick to equality for all people. So
Either we have a war with Palestine or we have a war without international law. We are in front of bifurcation. You have a question? Last question, because we're going through the time, but
Yeah.
I guess
it's not-
everyone is enjoying the course.
Well, actually, it's not question. I'm sharing my story, my family story. I'm from Indonesia, and Indonesia had been recognized, had been colonized by Dutch colonizers
Dutch.
for more than 300 years. And then Palestine was the first nation that recognized Indonesian of independence. And then my family background, well, my great grandfather was Islamic jihad fighter who led and expelled Dutch colonizers and who led the indigenous people in our land, Borneo, Kalimantan. And then what Palestinians feel these days, we feel the same. And we keep doing anything in our home country. And then, as a young generation, we keep spreading our news on this Instagram. Social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. And then also, because I'm Muslim, it's Akidah and Amanah, which is extremely mandatory to have Palestine. So, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And it's interesting to see with the border peace that Indonesia is the first country that actually is going.
It's terrible.
Well, it's terrible because it's terrible to participate to the border peace.
Yeah.
To stop. We can discuss the border peace for another hour if you want, but I'm writing a
That deserves another book, I would say.
another book. I'm writing an article about the ethics of it.
right.
Yes. My gosh.
We want to.
But what I wanted to say, it's also interesting that Indonesia is the first one to send troops in because not participating to the border peace would be the right thing to do. But also it's important that some troops are sent in that are sympathetic to the Palestinians because at the moment, beyond the yellow line, we don't know what's happening, right? They are removing rubble with the bones of Palestinian children in it without us knowing what's going on. So we are continuously in front of these impossible things about, oh my gosh, 20,000 troops from Indonesia are going in. They can bear witness to, but they shouldn't be there because the border peace is a hollow, terroristic institution, like an institution that shouldn't exist.
Yeah, we disagree with our president because it's horrible to register our nation to support border office. So yeah. We want to organize a demonstration in Indonesia.
Interesting.
To disagree.
Interesting. Thank you.
And they keep moving the yellow line, don't they?
Okay. Any more comments, Roberto? Thank you so much for coming. This was possibly one of the best events that we've had. Your book is incredible. It makes us really think as the West. And I really love the fact that you're writing this book as a Western person from the West, which I think is really great, right? You're not trying to write it from any one point of view but the West, which is really, really, really important to subject the West to this self-examination, right?
Yes, that's an important remark that I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
Because when this whataboutism, right? I touch a bit, right? What about Sudan? What about I mentioned the statistics, I mentioned the genocide, I mentioned the exceptionality of the case. But there is another reason that should be mentioned. That is seldom discussed because we get lost into these semantics. when we approach a crime, a war crime around the world, our selection process should be, okay, you deal with that, you deal with Sudan. For me, Sudan is another case that should be tackled, right? We should help Sudan, we should help some other countries. But in my perspective, my first priority is about the crimes done in my name, done by my own government,
Yeah.
who is the third exporters of weapons to Israel. So that's how I created the priority list. It was not about
Yeah, no, you came from the Western perspective, which is really important. We need to have everyone's voice in, and that's this self-examination is fantastic. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, I was looking at that.
It just stop the recording.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I see.
Oh, yes, we do have a mailing list so that you can receive our events directly. Is that all?
So we have.
Then ask for a question online, but too late.
Yeah, maybe you have some comments online.
Let's set it up.
I want to add my name to the mailing list, and I don't have to write you.
I'm not just this proposed study at the university.
Yes. No, he asked questions.
Big when you are online.
Art Gallery.
More time.
6 weeks. So we do it lots of events this style.
Also have to online.
People online, and thank you for coming.
It's an international.
The workforce question Q&A.
I didn't like the Wednesday, so it's
Thank you for the work. We will do like
You don't have to wait until it's
I'll do that, thank you.
But they wrote back to me and said, oh, we haven't ascertained.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes,
Yeah, great.
that's the idea.
Well,
Exactly, it was the same argument.
Stop sharing, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That could,
Can I go?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay.